Dobar dan, dobrodošli u Pola sata Demostata. Moje ime je Marija Stojanović, a danas razgovaramo sa gospodinom Sašom Toumzom, britanskim vojnim atašeom u Srbiji. Mr. Toumz, thank you for taking time to speak to Demostat.
Dobar dan, and thank you very much indeed for the invitation. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today with you.
Great. What are the main areas of the military cooperation between the United Kingdom and Serbia? We all know that the bilateral military cooperation plan was signed in March, so can you tell us something about it?
Of course, I'd be delighted to tell you a bit about the bilateral plan that we have with the Serbian Armed Forces. I think the first thing I'd like to say is that it's a very large plan and one that's growing all the time, and I think very exciting from our perspective. So it's a great opportunity to be able to give you a bit of that information here. Perhaps I could start with the most important thing that I think we do together with the Serbian Armed Forces, which is actually deploy on peacekeeping operations. Not that many people necessarily know, but the Serbian Armed Forces are actually together with the British Army deployed in a military police platoon that are in the United Nations force in Cyprus. That's been going now for about 3 years, and something that we regard as absolutely the key point really between the relationship with our two countries. And if I may, I'd just like to pay tribute to the Serbian Armed Forces. Putting your soldiers on peacekeeping operations and in harm's way is an amazing thing to do. And for us to be able to do that jointly is a real privilege. But of course, that's not the only thing that we do. And if I think about what else we do, probably some of the main areas that we do is work together in a professional relationship. We've lots of areas such as human resources, but perhaps for me, the most important one is probably medical. We've been building a medical relationship with the Serbian Armed Forces now for several years. And we've got to the point whereby the Surgeon General of the United Kingdom and the head of the military medical services here in Serbia have a professional relationship and know each other quite well. And actually our Surgeon General is now a visiting professor at the Serbian Military Academy. So that's a really wonderful occasion for us. And he's able to come over and deliver a number of lectures. I think another really important part of that is the fact that we've got a huge number of activities below it. I think almost 18 coming up this year where we have medical interaction. Everything from people going to the UK to do toxicology courses through to British neurosurgeons coming here to participate in conferences, which is very, very good because it's a proper peer exchange of views. And then also a number of other exchanges, lots of nurses actually. And this year we had some nurses going over to the UK to attend a ceremony, which was the Florence Nightingale ceremony. And I think that reflects something else, which is part of the shared values and histories of our countries, which perhaps we will talk about later as well, which is the whole medical crossover and the fact that the nurses are there celebrating a proud tradition and a proud heritage of which much of happened in the First World War, when lots of Scottish nurses, I'm thinking about Elsie Inglis, Elizabeth Ross and the doctors came over and spent a lot of time trying to help in the typhus epidemic. We also do more than that, though, and a lot of it is about the professional military exchanges. We have a number of courses in the United Kingdom which Serbian officers attend, and also there is, at the moment, an exchange officer here attending a course, the General Staff course, which is the year-long course. So we regard that as the backbone, really, of our academic studies. And each year, the VSBO senior staff course come over to the UK, and we're very proud that we're able to show them really as much as we can of our government and our areas. And we were delighted this year that the Minister for the Armed Forces was able to speak to them. And I think that shows the level of interaction that we have and the value that we place on that relationship. We also try and spend quite a bit of time professionally educating each other in terms of what we call staff rides, which is when you go and look at a historical area and try and understand the lessons. And for us, we've done that on the Salonika front recently with the General Staff course, but also we hope to plan to do something with the medical world as well later on. And then I think perhaps, if I may, to finish off on this particular theme, another really strong part of the relationship between our two countries is the senior engagement. So during my time here, we've had the Defence Minister from Serbia going to visit the UK, which followed a visit by our Defence Minister back to Serbia. And that's been followed by visits by the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff from here, all the way through to this summer when we had the Commander of our Field Army here in Serbia. And we very much hope that the Commander of the Serbian Land Forces will be able to reciprocate next year back in the UK.
Thank you. In your opinion, what were the key moments in the British-Serbian military cooperation over the last almost 2 centuries? We have already mentioned the First World War.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. There's been a huge amount of cooperation over the last 2 centuries. Probably for me, the cooperation starts in 1837 when a British military colonel, Colonel Hodges, came to present his credentials here in Serbia. And I think he was only the second country to come and create an official delegation. So the history definitely started very early on. And then, of course, we've been allies for a long, long time. First World War being probably the most important mark, I think, to start with. And perhaps it's interesting to reflect on Admiral Trowbridge, who was a British naval officer who came here at the beginning of the First World War. He helped to lead the defence of Belgrade. He created the Danube flotilla and was instrumental in trying to be with the Serbian armed forces at that particular period in time. Unfortunately, as we know, the Serbian armed forces had to move southwards, and he was then responsible for helping to move them from the Albanian coast to Corfu for their reconstitution. But he stayed. He was there throughout the rest of World War I on the Salonika front and came back with the forces when they were victorious at the end. And then World War II, I think World War II, again, there has been a lot of interaction between our two countries. We've had a number of SOE, Special Operations Executive soldiers, who parachuted and came into Serbia during the Second World War and spent a lot of time helping this, to defeat the Nazis. And I think, interestingly, there's a fascinating bit of history there too, which is often overlooked, that lots of little things that these individuals were able to do, one of which was they were, two particular individuals were able to, with the Serbians, of course, produce and make the first runway in the area which was used by the Halyard operation, which, of course, became a much bigger thing with the Americans later on in the war. And then, if I may, I'd just like to add something on a personal note. The relationship for me is very important because I discovered not that long ago that my great uncle was actually the British attaché here from 1945 to 1948. He was a prisoner of war in the Second World War, having been captured by the Germans at Dunkirk in 1940. And he spent many years in captivity. But whilst he was in captivity, he was together with a Serbian officer. We're not entirely sure how that came about. But he learnt Serbian whilst he was in this prisoner of war camp. And so at the end of the war, all he wanted to do was travel. And of course, having learnt Serbian, he was delighted to come back here. And so it runs in the family. And I'm glad to say that history is still here.
Thank you. After the tragic events that took place in the north of Kosovo in late September, the UK decided to deploy additional troops to NATO's peacekeeping mission in Kosovo, to KFOR. What is your assessment of the current security situation in this area?
If I may just say a few words about the British deployments. You're absolutely right that the British have deployed troops. I think the point I'd like to make is that absolutely they are there as part of the NATO peacekeeping force, as part of KFOR. And the decision to send them was as a result of a request which came from the Supreme Allied Commander. And of course, the UK were more than happy to be able to reciprocate for a number of reasons. I think just in terms of numbers, we had 400 soldiers who were here during the September period. They were part of the strategic reserve for KFOR and exercising, and we brought an extra 200 later on. And I would hope that what you see is that we've been able to help KFOR by bolstering its forces, by producing more professional and impartial soldiers who are able to produce an environment really which is more conducive to peacekeeping.
Speaking about the NATO, what is the importance of the NATO to the British defence policy?
NATO is really fundamental to the British defence policy. I think NATO is really the bedrock of our defence policy. It's the most extraordinary organisation. It's got 31 member countries, I think totalling a population of about 1 billion people. And it's all about collective defence. And I think that's the point that I would like to stress. It's about collective defence. It's about making sure that people are able to make their own decisions about what they want to do and look at a future which we have shared values and shared understanding and shared goals with. And NATO is something which the UK has absolutely got at the basis of its policy, and it will be something that endures for us into the future as the bedrock of our defence.
This is a bit of a controversial question in Serbia, but do you think that Serbia would benefit from the NATO membership? I
think it's a really fascinating question. I think the way to answer that for me is to say that Serbia could benefit from joining NATO or being a stronger, having a stronger relationship with NATO. I mean, I think the point I would like to make is anyone who wishes to join NATO are able to do that under their own steam. And so any decision about NATO for Serbia is as a decision for Serbia alone, a sovereign decision. But I think there are many ways that Serbia and NATO can cooperate, and indeed do cooperate at the moment. Serbia at the moment is a member of the Partnership for Peace programme for NATO. Serbia has an individual action plan which allows it to align itself to a certain extent with NATO, and that is supported by a NATO office which is commanded by a one-star general here in the Ministry of Defence. And I think there are a number of things really which probably stand out in terms of that relationship. The first is it's about interoperability. NATO forces are able to work together. They exercise together, they have the same tactics, techniques and procedures and a lot of the same doctrine. And the reason why that's important is because it means that we can do multinational operations. And I think for Serbia to be able to align itself with NATO means that it's able to work with those nations and can therefore deploy on multinational peacekeeping operations, which is something we've already talked about. And again, I'd just like to pay tribute to the fact that Serbia does so much, not least of which is, for instance, with a field hospital in the Central African Republic. But I think the second one too is it's about professionalism. NATO is an organisation which aspires to be the very best. And there are a number of areas within NATO where people come together to exchange and bring out the best in the professional armies that we have. And perhaps I can go back to the theme we talked about earlier, which is medical. And so there is an organisation called COMEDS. It's the cooperation of the chiefs of medical staffs. And Serbia is an observer to that. And I think it's a great opportunity for them to be able to understand what's happening in NATO, but also for NATO to be able to understand what's happening in Serbia and to, again, get that kind of peer exchange going.
Thank you. As we all know, Russia is strongly opposed to the NATO's enlargement and views as a threat to its own security. Can Russian aggression in Ukraine be partly justified by the NATO expansion or not?
I think there are lots of views about NATO, but the one thing about NATO which is paramount to me and to the United Kingdom is that NATO is inherently a defensive organisation. The whole point about NATO is that it's about collective defence. And so therefore there is nothing about NATO which is provocative, and there is nothing about NATO which is seeking to extend itself further than those countries that are already their members. And the other thing that I would just point out, and if we use the example perhaps of Sweden at the moment and Finland, is that actually NATO is about people wishing to be there of their own volition. So I would say to anyone who has a concern with NATO, it's a voluntary organisation, people are only there if they want to be, and absolutely secondly, it's a defensive organisation only.
Can you tell us something about the British military support for Ukraine?
Yes, I most certainly can. I think the British military support for Ukraine is extremely strong. If I start perhaps by just making it clear that the British government really deplores the invasion of Ukraine. We think it's an absolutely illegal and an unjust movement by the Russians, and we are really we find this an awful situation, and so we stand together with Ukraine. We believe Ukraine has the right to be a democratic and independent nation, and as part of that, the British government and the British military play their part. I think one of the most important things we've done is help train Ukrainian soldiers. Over 37,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been trained by the British in the last 2 years. And also we help with equipment. We've given a lot of equipment, precision fires, artillery, air defense, armored vehicles, all of these for the Ukrainian military to be able to use. And of course, it's expensive, but quite rightly, that's what we wish to support. And I think over £2.3 billion worth of support has been given last year, and another £2.3 billion of support will be given this year. And finally, it's not just us. There's a huge international coalition that wish to support Ukraine. And one of the things that the British military and the British government are keen to do is get that support together. And we would actively encourage everyone to join us in that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toumz. Do you have any other message which you can deliver to the Serbian audience?
I think the main message I would like to leave on is to say thank you very much indeed for having me here in Serbia. I've had the most amazing time in my period as defence attaché here. I have never once had anyone be anything but wonderful and hospitable to me. And so I will leave, I'm sure, the same way that my great uncle did, with a huge fondness for this part of the world and its people. So thank you very much indeed.
Hvala vam, dragi gledalci, na pažnji i vidimo se drugom prilikom.